Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? Alright, today we're looking at Uncanny X-Men number 258, which is an interesting issue because this is at a time when Jim Lee is undergoing a pretty rapid evolution. Like, he's already very good at this point. He's on the verge of superstardom. But you can actually see him learning things on the page in this one. He's putting more black into the figures. He's coming up with slightly more dynamic compositions, although he might have some help with that. But this is at that time when Jim Lee was trying to expand his horizons. He was trying to push himself on every page, which is the version of Jim Lee I like best. This is also, I think, the beginnings of Homage Studios, which we'll get into as we get into the issue. But we got this really interesting time right before Jim Lee's about to leap into superstardom. So this is that great little window where he's still learning but on the verge of breaking out. So, a little bit of backstory for context. This is issue 3 of the 3-issue Acts of Vengeance crossover. Just a thing the editorial office came up with where villains would fight different heroes than they're used to. And so the Mandarin drew the short straw, and he got the X-Men. But turns out that there aren't really very many X-Men right now. It's a lot easier to say, I defeated the X-Men when there's only 2 of them. So the Mandarin managed to get Psylocke under his thrall and turn her into an Asian ninja, because, that's his kink, I guess. And on behalf of the Mandarin, she captured Wolverine and Jubilee. Although Jubilee's not really an X-Man just yet. So that's kind of where we're starting things off. So let's get started. We can start with the cover here. I think this is the best cover we've seen from Jim Lee so far. He's coming up with some decent ones around this time, like particularly in the Acts of Vengeance storyline. There's some covers I think at least some people would call iconic. I'm like, yeah, they're pretty good, and I've seen them a lot. So I guess that qualifies for iconic, sure. But I think this is the first one I've seen that's just outright fun. This is something we'd see from Jim Lee fairly often as he started to get a handle on Wolverine being the best character for him to draw, because he would usually draw him looking awesome. Get some great motion with the figures, kind of twisting the figure of Wolverine a little bit, but I feel like later on Jim Lee would learn to do that more. He might still be figuring that out a little bit. The Mandarin here is fun as well. I didn't realize this is the Mandarin until I read the issue, so apparently this is his armor. But that's a very fun-looking cover. You notice just how much black is in the figure of Wolverine here. We're going with some pretty stark double lighting along the arm, the entire outside of him here. I don't think we've seen a whole lot of this from Jim Lee at this time. In the issues previous to this, he has definitely thrown in a few heavily shadowed panels, but it hasn't become like an integral part of his style just yet. It's more like he saves it for close-ups or, when he's trying to get super dramatic. He hasn't been thinking about incorporating it into just every aspect of the book just yet. And I think he's starting to work on that in this. Like someone told him, no, if you get more black in the figure looks better. But that arm in particular just looks great. Like super solid and, just like mostly silhouetted really. Okay, so we're going to open up with a whole bunch of negative space on a page that hopefully Jim Lee didn't take all day on. So credits on this, of course, are going to be Chris Claremont as the writer, Jim Lee as penciler, Scott Williams as inker. I take some issue with that because there's a name missing there, and that's Will Sportasio, whose work I definitely recognized in this issue. I think this is the first issue in which Homage Studios has started to become like its own entity. So for those of you who don't know, Homage Studios was Jim Lee, Will Sportasio, Scott Williams. And basically they would operate as a studio. So when Jim Lee got pages, or, probably sometimes with Will's too, then the 3 of them would get together and they would just kind of take pages communally. So either Jim Lee or Wills could be doing breakdowns, could be doing finished pencils, could be doing inking. And of course, Scott Williams was doing inking on, whatever came over his desk. And between the 3 of them, they were able to knock out some pretty spectacular looking issues very quickly. And I think the reason that Will Sportasio had to come in on this, for one thing, I assume that Wills and Jim have become good friends at this point. And this is the 3rd month in a row that Jim Lee is having to draw a comic, which has never been something he's been very good at, is producing multiple comics in a row on a monthly schedule. So, the first 2 issues, I think those are more Jim. This 3rd one here, things are starting to get a little tight. Wills, can you help me out with this? Just a little bit of finishes here and there. So our opening page here starts with a meditating Wolverine. So this is at the point where Wolverine has been captured, and this is more just on the psychic plane, essentially. And we've got a version of Wolverine that is very influenced by Art Adams, I'd say. It's interesting seeing the different phases of Jim Lee, because Weapon X hasn't come out yet. So he hasn't gotten to that point yet where he's like, holy shit, I need to over-render everything, because that was the lesson he took from Weapon X, and he was correct. At this time, he's more taking his cues from Art Adams, which still requires a whole lot of detail, particularly when it comes to a mostly naked Wolverine. You got to get all that body hair in there. So as he's meditating, some black goop comes into Wolverine's psyche and starts to take him over. And we're going to zoom in on him from a high angle here as he just gets, like, subsumed. It's pretty good stuff, almost like a Neil Adams kind of page design here with all the diagonal panels. Not something you would see from Jim very often later on. Like at this time, like I said, Jim Lee is learning and he's willing to take chances. So outside of Wolverine's psyche, Psylocke is trying to find a way to control Wolverine. You know, she's been taken over by the Mandarin, and she's a super powerful telepath ninja. So now she's got the task of trying to tame the beast here. So he's actually locked in this sensory deprivation chamber here. We got Matsuo overseeing the thing. He's working for the Mandarin too. And he's just kind of explaining what the deal is to Jubilee, who's also been captured. Again, some interesting looking stuff going on here where we're going with the high angle as Betsy's just kind of sitting in the lotus position, like above the sensory deprivation tank. But still popping around the panel a little bit. Like it's a pretty good composition. I like this quite a bit. I think this is the start of the Whilce pages. You can usually tell by Matsuo's hair. If it starts looking kind of feathery and whimsical, that I don't think is a Scott Williams thing. That seems like Whilce to me. So now that he's had the black goop kind of cover him, it's corrupted him from the outside. Now it's gonna corrupt him from within, unleashing the beast, the animal kind of side of Wolverine. That's a very interesting version. Again, it doesn't look too much like Jim Lee, although, these are early days. But we're going with some Stark uplighting, covering him with boils, getting them all, getting kind of cartoonish with just how stretched out the mouth is getting here. I'm looking at that hair. That looks like Whilce hair. So I think Whilce is just kind of stretching things a little bit, which is one of the things Whilce does best. When I first started reading Uncanny X-Men, it was at issue 275, and that was my bar for how good comics could get for a long time. And the reason it was so good was it was Jim Lee and Whilce Portacio and Scott Williams working to make it the best-looking comic they could. So it's cool seeing these early days where they're kind of working around each other's styles. So we've got the bestial Wolverine now. He's been released inside of his mind anyway. He's still stuck within the sensory deprivation chamber. And Psylocke kind of mimics the pose that his mind is in. Sure. Because by trying to reach out to him, she's kind of taken on bits of his personality. Jubilee, of course, all she sees is Wolverine thrashing around inside of the sensory deprivation chamber, so she's freaking out. She's like, why are you doing this? What do you want from us? And Matsuo says, consider it an act of vengeance. It's like, oh shit, we're actually going to name drop the crossover? I was not really expecting that, but sure. But the reason they need vengeance is because Wolverine single-handedly decimated one of the great houses of our order. That is a debt which cannot be left unpaid. I take it this is in the Wolverine miniseries, maybe. And of course, Jubilee keeps freaking out on Matsuo. She keeps calling him crazy. And he gets very highfalutin, saying he's an artist. Meanwhile, his lackeys down here are saying that Psylocke is too powerful a telepath. Whatever she's doing, it's kind of spreading to everybody in the room. So, she's becoming kind of feral because she's in touch with Wolverine's mind, and she's just kind of spreading that out to everybody, And, this is definitely a Whilce page. As soon as I saw what was going on with Jubilee here, where she looks like kind of an old lady from this angle, it's like, wait, what? That's not a Jim Lee thing. He's never done anything like that. That was what started to clue me in. And because I imagine it's probably Jim that's slowing the process down, not Scott Williams, that probably means that Jim is doing breakdowns. Probably pretty detailed breakdowns, but then he's passing those pages, like basically split them down the middle, it seems like, between Whilce and Scott Williams. And they have to put in a bit more work than they normally would, so that just kind of shares the load a bit. Kind of like with Psylocke and the Minions. So, they're saying like some of our more susceptible personnel are bound to be affected, as one of the minions just kind of lands on some ninjas going kill, 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 kill. Matsuo's distracted, releases Jubilee for a second. She takes advantage and starts tossing fireworks around the place, just, blinding people. And then she starts running. And I think I think Chris Claremont still at this time has it in his head that Jubilee has enhanced agility, because that was how she was originally described, although I think we're probably going to be losing that in pretty short order. Another Wills page. Again, there's that hair. But there, look, check out the weird face on Jubilee. Jim Lee didn't draw that face. Also, whenever you see things get really smudgy and tight, and, just kind of like, when things start getting more creative looking and less polished, that says Wills to me. This feels like the kind of thing he's going to be doing very shortly in Uncanny number 267, where he gets a whole issue to himself. And holy shit, is that an issue that I'm looking forward to. All right, she keeps running, and she's managing to evade all the ninjas, because sure, that's what like a 13-year-old girl can do. I mean, the hand have been kind of established as being useless for a while. I feel like they were only particularly useful when Frank Miller was writing them. Although, I don't know, I haven't read Frank Miller's Daredevil stuff in quite some time. So maybe they were incompetent then, too. It could be. And every time they show up in an X-Men story, they're always like pulling Three Stooges shit. But yeah, she's leaping around. She's like bulldogging ninjas. She's sliding through their legs and throwing out her fireworks every which way until she turns a corner, runs into a houndstooth zipatone. So we know what that is. We've seen that back in issue 256. That's the Mandarin. So he's like, why you disturb the tranquility of my house? So it's like he was like the parrot upstairs, and there was all sorts of ruckus in the basement, and and he let it go for a bit, but now he's got to go down and toggle the lights a couple of times to get their attention. Jubilee gears up to hit him with some fireworks and some American sass, which he doesn't like. He controls her with his Mento intensifier ring. That's it. And says, how sad to behold a daughter of the Middle Kingdom so sullied by the mongrel ways of the West. So, man, sucks to see a Chinese girl just talking so white. Which would be a weird thing to put in a comic these days, that's for sure. But, I guess there weren't that many Asian characters in American comics at this time. I think even then, most writers didn't usually make a point of noticing it, but Chris kind of has carte blanche to do what he wants, right? So, as he's got Jubilee under his control, the ninjas come running up because, obviously they were chasing her around all over the place and shit. And they're all still amped up from having been in the room with Wolverine and Psylocke. I assume that's what's going on there because they're just like in complete attack mode. So they see Jubilee, they see the Mandarin, and they just come rushing at the Mandarin. Like we gotta get that girl and probably kill her and kill everybody around her. And the Mandarin doesn't take kindly to being attacked, so he's like, he's got all his rings. He starts throwing around some kind of blast. This looks like fire. I don't know what's going on here, but it certainly hurts some people. Yeah, he's just like using all sorts of different effects, and then he starts breaking out the karate moves. I don't know what move this is, where you kick the one ninja and you throw the arm from the same side over your head to punch the other. I think he saw that in cheerleading tryouts. But he managed to do this without his houndstooth coat becoming unbuttoned, so that's why the Mandarin is, he's a supervillain instead of just a regular minion. And then Matsuo comes in after her, and he's like, oh, shit, I fucked up, didn't I? I'm sorry. And Mandarin's like, yeah, you better say you're sorry. I'm going to fry your skin off. He's like, yeah, no, I'm sorry. So very, very sorry. Another Wills page, you look at all these streaky effects getting thrown around. There's a lot of energy to the ninja figures here. And again, there's that feathery, whimsical hair. Yeah, this is definitely a Wills page. All right, then we got to get a couple of pages cutting back to Muir Island because there's a bunch of X-Men over there, or kind of X-Men adjacent people. And I mean, they had a couple of issues that were all to themselves with no other X-Men at all. So, I mean, I guess we got to keep cutting back to them every once in a while because otherwise those issues were completely pointless, and we can't have that. So we got to cut to Banshee because everybody loves Banshee. They love Banshee the best. He's flying around Muir Island when all of a sudden white noise generators attack him, and he starts getting all wrapped up in some tangle webs. Apparently, they gagged him first so he can't use his voice. So it looks like Banshee's been captured. Only it turns out that this is part of the defenses for the island that Forge has been creating for Moira. Moira has been kind of wanting to crack down, like really turn up the home security. So when we get back into the control room here, it turns out everybody's got these new X uniforms on. These are kind of similar to, again, what was being worn in, I think, issue 253 when we had the replacement X-Men. Banshee kind of complains about the uniforms. Danny likes them, but Banshee's like, I don't know, they don't feel quite dignified. It's like, yes, because your green and yellow number was just so much more fashionable. But you can see some of that black creeping into the figures here whenever you got to do a dark spot. You know, like the yellow parts of the costume, yeah, that's just line work. There's essentially no shadow in that. But all the darker areas, yeah, he goes pretty heavy on the blacks. And I think part of that is down to Wils's influence. Because he is doing finishes on some of these pages, I think probably this one, just how detailed and kind of, I don't know, loose this stuff gets. Looks like maybe. He might be pushing it in terms of how much black is getting put into the figures here. And I think he might be advising Jim on how he should be doing that. Because I remember noticing that with Will Sportasio on X Factor, where anytime you get a dark part of a costume, you really amp up the black in that part of the figure. And it just makes everything look so much more dramatic. But yeah, it just seems like creativity comes a lot easier to somebody like Will's than it does to somebody like Jim. Jim seems to be great at absorbing influences. Like legitimately great at it. Where he sees an element that he thinks will work in his style and seems to be better than what he's currently doing. So he's like, okay, I got to take that element and figure out how to translate it. And then he does it and he optimizes it and tweaks it until it's like the best version of that element that he could come up with. And then he'll just file that away, bring it out every time he has to draw that element again. And he'll draw it the exact same way every time. And that's all you're ever going to see whenever he has to draw that thing. Will's just seems to be a little bit crazy, where he's just got like a little bit too much creativity and he's a little bit too loose with a brush. And sometimes he's just got to go for a run in the field. I remember the Wildstorm behind the scenes book. Will's published a couple of sketchbook pages in there. And one of the drawings was of this messed up looking toy duck. And it's just like, man, I just felt like drawing a duck that day. It's like, I believe you, Wills. Anyway, we were talking about a comic. We might want to get back to the comic. Different part of the headquarters here. So Polaris, this is of course Polaris without her magnetic powers. Instead, she has super strength and super durability, is apparently being trapped by Legion. Specifically, the bad boy Jack Wayne identity of Legion's multiple personalities. So I guess Jack Wayne is very aware of what the hierarchy of Legion's personalities is. And that's everything we're going to get for the Muir Island stuff, which is probably for the best. The Muir Island stuff has not, like, I don't have much of an interest in it, but it's not really here to drive the plot. This is more just keeping tabs on these characters, because Claremont has a few ideas for what he wants to do with this stuff later down the line. I believe this stuff starts to come up during the Extinction Agenda, but it doesn't really come to a head, particularly this stuff with Legion, until around issue 280 or so, maybe 281, which is like almost 2 full years after this. Okay, so back in Hong Kong, we're going to get the most racist thing we're going to see in X-Men for a while, I feel like. You know, this is 1990. I feel like you can get away with it at the time. Probably. I don't know, even then, I feel like Claremont might have gotten a couple of raised eyebrows in the editorial office when he turned this in. But I guess we're in the Mandarin's headquarters again, and he's dressed Jubilee up like a Japanese, like, no actor, almost. And she's kind of going along with it to a point. He's speaking in Chinese, and she says, no speaky Chinese, only American. And the Mandarin starts up a spiel where he's like, spirit is admirable, child, to a point. You are Chinese with a heritage as noble as it is ancient. And it is the Mandarin's charge to ensure you remain true to it. You and those of your mutant breed shall form the vanguard of my army, which will restore the Middle Kingdom to its rightful glory, as preeminent among the world's great powers. And Jubilee responds by sticking out her tongue, which the Mandarin ain't too happy about. And that's the end of that sequence. I gotta say, this Acts of Vengeance crossover, this feels absolutely essential. Alright, meanwhile, back at that lab thing where Wolverine... Remember when Wolverine was in this comic? I kind of missed that now. So we're back in Wolverine's mind, and Psylocke's trying to come at him from a different direction, where she's coming at him as the women that Wolverine has loved. She comes at him as Jean Grey, as Mariko, and as Yukio. I didn't know Yukio was up there. I mean, Chris Claremont wrote this shit. I guess he would know. And tries to seduce Logan, but Logan ain't having that shit. And pops claws and starts slashing at her. So I guess wasn't quite as serene as he appeared to be at first. Again, there's that blackness in the figure there. We haven't seen... Oh, there we go. I was about to say, we haven't seen some dynamic stuff in the panels for a little while, but now we're coming along. So, you know, Wolverine, he's had enough. He's like, no more games. If you got the guts, face me as yourself. So, yeah. I guess we're inside Wolverine's brain, and Psylocke ninja kicks him. And they're going to have a ninja fight in Wolverine's mind. It's a pretty fun-looking fight, too. before Psylocke gets out the Psychic Blade, the ultimate focus of her Psy powers. It hasn't yet become the focus totality of her Psy powers. And shoves it right through his face. But yeah, there's some fun stuff going on. The no panel border, negative space panel to start a page with, that is a Whilce classic. I don't think we've seen Jim Lee do it too much up until now. I mean, we haven't looked at a ton of Jim Lee around this time, but still, I don't think it's something we've really noticed. And I mean, this is an apt time to do it, really, when they're inside of his consciousness. Still, I feel like this is maybe a suggestion from Jay that you know what's one way that you can kind of tone down your workload a little bit? Not all of them have to be panels. Some of them can just be drawings. So anyway, she hits him with the psychic knife, and then she just starts screaming on top of his tank. Because I guess this is like the Psy link. So this is her attempt to take over his mind, but, it's Logan's will versus her will. Logan's will generally wins against anybody's will in one of these things. So yeah, he's shoving parts of his mind onto her. And all of a sudden, she starts seeing the apparitions of Nick Fury and Sharon Carter that Wolverine has been seeing up until now. And she starts just like duking it out with them on top of the tank. And then we cut quickly to some of Matsuo's minions going like, who the fuck is she fighting? But, this is some fun stuff. I like this angle that they picked here for showing her, like, it looks like, she's completely losing control. And that could have come out a fair bit more boring. Meanwhile, Logan's going nuts in the tank and slashing around at the glass. And before the minions can do anything, he is able to breach it. And all the water here goes rushing out. And the hand ninjas have to come in to reinforce the place. So now we're down for the Hand versus Wolverine. A pissed off Wolverine who's been getting his mind screwed with for the last who knows how long. Look at all the black getting piled into the figure. This is definitely a Whilce page. You look at that hair. I mean, it's supposed to be wet hair. I get that. But still, I don't think Scott Williams doing that hair. And Psylocke jumps down to tangle with Wolverine. She's like, the prey is mine, and so too the honor of the kill. So they're going to duke it out in a battle very similar to the one at the end of X-Men number 6. That also involved a mind-controlled Psylocke. So yeah, Jim Lee just ripped that shit off wholesale. It's like that whole storyline from issue 4 to issue 7 of Jim Lee's X-Men title was just him going, man, I really liked that Acts of Vengeance story I did. I think I could do it a little bit better. So that's just what I'm going to do. And then it turned out he was wrong because he didn't have time to draw all those pages. He had to get Art T-Bear to finish him. And I guess he forgot that Whilce was the one helping him on that one. Anyway, we're going to cut back to the Mandarin's quarters where Psylocke carries in Wolverine, which always makes me laugh whenever I see somebody just carrying Wolverine around, let alone somebody like Psylocke. Because, he's got the metal on his bones. He probably weighs like 400 or 500 pounds. And tosses him down. So apparently she won the battle. Or, that's what it seems like at least. But doesn't the figure of Wolverine look great? Yeah, I think that's where it's coming from. Is Jim Lee's having to come up with just breakdowns and Whilce is filling in the details. And he's putting in way more black than Jim Lee would normally do. And Jim Lee is taking notes. Because this much black would show up in Jim Lee's figures later on. And I don't think it's purely down to Whilce on those issues. So Jubilee can't handle seeing Wolverine looking like he got defeated, so she basically explodes. Explodes like the room. And then sits in the middle of it going, how the hell did I do that? And do I ever want to do that again? Maybe not. That's a fun panel there with all the streakiness, the speed lines coming out, all the whited out circles coming from Jubilee here. This is another one I think Whilce probably helped with, but maybe not. Just because this shot of Jubilee down here, it looks very clean. So, but I don't know. Just because Whilce was inking on a page doesn't mean he inked the whole page either. So, with everybody kind of knocked on their ass for a second, Psylocke's going to leap into action and go straight at the Mandarin. So it appears as though when she made contact with Wolverine's brain, that broke whatever hold Mandarin had over her, or Matsuo had over her, somebody had over her. Later, it would come up that Matsuo has a hold on her, and that wouldn't really be explained. It should theoretically just be the Mandarin. But yeah, she goes running at the Mandarin here. Kind of not quite right looking foreshortening there, but there's an ass there, so I guess nobody's going to complain, right? Mandarin manifests his Mandarin armor, I suppose, and responds with flame, which she has to dodge out of the way of. And yeah, we're going to, this is the culmination of the Acts of Vengeance crossover. So I guess we got to have a fight between the X-Men and the villain crossing over. Only, like I said, there aren't very many X-Men to have a fight with them. And the whole thing has been between the Mandarin and Psylocke, kind of, up until now. So I guess it's appropriate for just Psylocke to be going one-on-one with the Mandarin. Also, it's felt for a while like Chris Claremont has wanted to make Psylocke more of a fan-favorite kind of character. Like, she's had all sorts of opportunities in stuff like Captain Britain, but the problem is most people who were reading Uncanny X-Men didn't read the UK comic called Captain Britain. So nobody saw all that character development. So whenever he tries to shove Psylocke into a story in Uncanny X-Men, I don't know how much the interest there is in the character. And it doesn't feel like Chris has anything interesting for her to do, because he's already done all that character work over in Captain Britain. So theoretically, he should be able to just drop her into a story and have her, kind of work in tandem with the other members, but it never seems to do that. But anyway, she manages to get the Mandarin in a headlock and is about to hit him with the focused totality of her psychic powers, but he's able to block her hand and toss her flying here, toss her right at Jubilee. That's rude. Fun panel too, stretching Psylocke out across it. That's the stuff that Jim Lee likes to do. I think he's probably starting to figure that out right about now. Throw all the debris everywhere to get it kind of nice and dynamic. Mandarin's about to deliver the killing blow, but for some reason he can't quite direct his arm towards them. And that's because Psylocke is using her telepathic powers to basically have like a battle of wills between her and the Mandarin. So that's what this is going to come down to. They're just going to duke it out in the brain. And then a couple of claws come up around Mandarin's neck. So Wolverine was able to get the drop on him, get the fist right up to the back of his neck. And of course the implication with the two claws is that the middle one's still being held back. Doesn't have to stay that way though. Mandarin tries to do the thing where he's like, if you do manage to slay me with your third claw, I'm still going to have enough time to fry Psylocke down to the bone. And Wolverine responds by saying, well, then she'll be dead, but so will you. So that seems like a pretty fair trade. And that's around the point where Mandarin decides that Wolverine's maybe not bluffing. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but Mandarin isn't willing to push it that far. So he's going to capitulate, and he's basically just going to take off. And that's kind of the end of the crossover. We end with Jubilee and Psylocke and Wolverine on a boat. Psylocke is still in her ninja gear. I guess she likes this now. Jubilee was able to find a change of clothes so that she could, change out of the geisha gear. Wolverine found some pants. I don't know if he just didn't find a shirt. He's just like, nah, I'm good. But yeah, no, she's, you know what I really like? Walking around in a thong. That feels really freeing. But great looking boat here. Like this shot of the boat taking off out of the harbor is just spectacular. I'm pretty sure this is a Wills thing because there's all sorts of weird scratchiness going on in the wood. Again, I don't think Scott Williams does that. I think he finds a more slick way to render that. And nice dramatically lit, high contrast kind of shot here. Well, they're just going to have a little conversation to end the issue on. And, they got to confirm all the things that happened in the comic that they weren't able to explain at the time. Like her making contact with Wolverine's mind, that releasing the hold the Mandarin had over her. The thing with Wolverine and the Mandarin at the end being a bluff, but Wolverine figured it was a pretty safe bluff because when it comes down to it, the Mandarin was never going to value somebody else more than himself. So at that point, a stalemate is enough of victory because he, at least he's getting out of there with his life. There's no glory to be won, so you might as well just call it and try again next time. And that's kind of it. They don't really, she doesn't really mention the fact that, she's in a different body now. This is kind of her first opportunity to do that. She hasn't really had full possession of her faculties up until now. She's more focused on the fact that the X-Men are all broken up because of her, because she was the one who convinced them all to walk into the siege perilous. And that's kind of how we end things on, where, Wolverine gives her some cold comfort and we sail off into the sunset. So, yeah, we're just not going to talk about that anymore. But for the Acts of Vengeance crossover, yeah, that was a pretty truncated ending. I mean, I guess we did get kind of a cumulative fight, really between the two characters that, there was just the one main character throughout the entire 3 issues, which was Psylocke. And then Mandarin every once in a while check in and be like, hey, I'm here too. So I guess that is what the fight had to come down to. But man, that thing got over with in a hurry, which I think just reflects how little Chris Claremont even wanted it in this book in the first place. So that is going to do it for Uncanny X-Men number 258. Like I said, that is an interesting issue in terms of the presentation. I think Jim Lee learned some pretty important lessons on that he was going to use going forward. And we wouldn't see Jim again until issue 268 when he would become the full-time penciler on Uncanny X-Men for about a year, I suppose, give or take an issue. And we'll get to that very shortly. We got a couple of quick stops on the way, but that will also be interesting to see what new influences Jim Lee is picking up at the time, because they start snowballing, and the Jim Lee X-Men run is like a condensed evolution period where you can see Jim Lee transform into primetime Jim Lee in real time. It's fascinating looking stuff. And like I said, we'll get to that soon enough. But for this one anyway, that is going to do it. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Helps with all the algorithm stuff. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's my link tree. Follow that to my Patreon. And if you subscribe there, that gives you access to everything I do. So all sorts of videos, all sorts of Blood Force comics. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.